Good morning and welcome to Avèro Live on this very special Wednesday. I have a special guest today. Michael is a senior manager at Avèro and he leads our public safety practice. And we're going to talk about sustainable technology and how do you implement it, how do you go about choosing it, and how to keep up with it primarily. So before we get into that, I want to just tell you about Avèro. We're an independent technology agnostic consulting firm that focuses on modernizing governments across the country, and that includes public safety. And we do that through IT strategic planning, efficient business process redesign, and helping you pick the right technology because there's a lot out there. Technology changes a lot and it changes pretty rapidly. So, how do you know what's best for your agency or organization? And that's where we come in. We become your trusted advisor in helping you not only select but strategize on how you go from 30-year-old technology stack to something in the in the 21st century. So with that, I'm gonna open up. Oh, by the way, we go live every Wednesday at the same time, 10 a.m. Eastern, and bring on special guests like Mike today, who are partners here at Avèro, part of the team, or our industry stalwarts, and Mike happens to be both. Um, Mike, welcome to the show again. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've spent many years in public safety, but let's just start there.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. Sure, I spent 34 years in public safety. I worked both county environment, working under county board of supervisors, as well as city municipal police department, working for a city council, mayor, form of government. I worked most of my time on the command staff. I've done everything from officer to chief, and I spent many, many years running technology for the wealthiest municipality in Arizona. So not only implementing, procuring, but maintaining and making sure it stayed current.
And that's how Mike and I met. Mike used to be a client. I've got a track record of two former clients that now work with me, which is I take that as a badge of honor. So thank you for your trust as a client and as a member here at Vero. Um, Mike, let's talk about the topic at hand. Sustainable implementing sustainable technology. Are you talking about green technology and how to make uh, public safety vehicles more eco-friendly? What are you talking about here?
Well, that would be great, but that's not really the primary focus. We were the first in the state to implement electric motorcycles, so we did our share of the green stuff where we could, but it's not always possible. No, we're actually talking about selecting and implementing technology that will stay current over the course of your agency's lifespan. Contracts, implementations that allow you to enhance that technology as technology
Mhm.
grows, changes, so it doesn't become stale. We work with a lot of agencies. I knew a lot of agencies personally. We were one of them that, you implement the technology and you think that's the holy grail and you're good. And 5 years down the road, you haven't really maintained it or kept up with it or paid attention, and it's now stale, and it's time to replace it, and it's just in a place where it's really not working the way that you intended, and it's really hard to go back to your council and say, hey, I need another $2 million because it's really not working now, and I know you gave me $2 million 5 years ago, but I need more money now. And if you can show the success of the project when you go back to your council and say, this is the things it's provided for us, this is the benefits we've gotten out of it, and it's time to refresh it, it's a lot easier to sell.
So when you say sustainable, it's primarily how do you afford it? One, because sustainability is not just in terms of the tech you're buying, it's also how do you sustain your budget? Because things come up, mid-year if you haven't planned for this. And we're big proponents of strategic planning and laying out what it is you're buying and how it's going to be useful and how you're going to pay for it. So
Absolutely.
sustainability starts there at the planning phase. And then when you buy a certain thing, you want to make sure that it's the right thing, that it's going to last you for a long time, and that it's going to be useful to your agency. Did I
Right.
capture that right?
Yeah, you did. You actually jumped down to one of my lower bullet points was ongoing replacement funding, and
Mm,
that is a big issue. and it starts early and often. You want to communicate the benefits of what you're doing with your funding authority, whether that's a town council, whether that's a county board of supervisors,
Yeah.
whoever you report to and you get your funding from. And you need to really make them understand. Sometimes I've sat in front of councils, and the last thing you want to hear them say when they just spent $2 or $3 or $4 million on a project is, "Man, I'm glad we'll never have to do that again." And you're thinking in your mind, "Hey, I've got a 5-year contract, and in 5 years this comes due again." And so they didn't really understand. You want them to understand that the investment in the technology is ongoing. It's not one time. But to make it more palatable for those authorities, it's easier for us if we can break it down into segments. So, like if I could lease equipment over a 5-year lifespan and manage annual payments over those 5 years that are the same every 5 years, I would do that over a one-time purchase. Because again, they might go 2 million, we never have to do that again, and then I got to go ask for another 2 million. If they're used to committing $300,000 a year every year for a certain technology that we've implemented, it's really easy at the end of that 5-year contract when we have to renew to say, "Oh, it's just 300,000 like you've ever been paying. You're used to paying it. You budgeted for it," and so it makes it easier for them. There were some obviously equipment issues that we couldn't lease like that, and what we would try to do is create a long-term technology forecast. So we would look at those spikes in life cycles when this is a 3-year life cycle, this is a 5, and we would try to plan those out over the course of 10 budget years so that it stayed almost the same. Our funding request for technology would stay almost the same. If say we had laptops replacement at 3 years in the cars, and that was going to be a big spike because maybe gateways in the cars came up that same year, we'd move one of them and say, okay, we're going to replace that at 4 years, so that it just evens out that curve of what we're asking them to invest in it. And then I think the other couple of important things is signing long-term maintenance agreements. Those maintenance agreements have percentage spikes pretty much every year. And so locking in long-term agreements allows you to know what those cost increases are going to be over a longer period, so there's no surprises. And then finally, again, it goes back to communicating with your governing authority, creating metrics for success. And I'll just give you an example and sharing them. We implemented a multi-million-dollar license plate reader system, and one of our metrics for success was the amount of the value of property that we recovered due to license plate reader hits that we wouldn't have recovered. And we were going to our council on a regular basis and providing updates on their investment in that technology. And we're showing a 20x return on recovered stolen property for our residents versus what we actually spent to implement it. And it just shows a great return on investment. And it generates that enthusiasm in our council that they want to continue this program and they're willing to invest in it.
Yeah, but how did you start? Because that's when we met, Mike. It seems like 50 years ago, but wasn't that long ago. It was maybe 10 years ago. But when we met, when I came in to do an IT strategic plan for the town, you were in the middle of this implementation. You were doing LPRs, you're doing RMS, you were overhauling the whole ecosystem for the PD
Right.
there.
Right.
Talk to us about how that started, because it's a smaller municipality with big, fund balances. I remember, and but there had to be a trigger, sort of a catalyst for them saying, "Go ahead, Commander Cole, bring us in." And at one point, that municipality was, I think, the most cutting edge PD in the U.S. and maybe therefore in the world. So
Right.
how did that come about?
Sure. A little bit longer of a story, but I'll make it as brief as possible. So it is per capita the wealthiest municipality in Arizona, one of them in the country. Very small, very affluent bedroom community, right in the heart of Phoenix metro area, right between Phoenix and Scottsdale, 5th largest municipal area in the country. And we had a very, very low crime rate because we had good budgets. We hired a lot of officers per capita, and we were very aggressive about pulling over the people that were doing the crimes that didn't belong there, that just a big show of visibility to keep those people out of our town. And because we had such a low crime rate, we had a town manager for a long time that didn't want to invest in technology. And his thought process was, we don't have the crime really to justify spending millions of dollars in technology. There's just not the crime there. And to some point, he was correct. Um, at the end of 2012, we had a spike in residential burglary percentages. That was the big crime in our town, multi-million dollar homes. They were worried about people breaking into their homes.
Right.
And so at the end of Q4, we showed a spike in residential burglary percentages. We were coming off the tail end of the recession. We had great community support. Our residents got very concerned about the increase in burglaries. They went to the council and said, what did you do to our police department during the recession? We want their funding restored. We want them to be the leaders in technology. We demand that you give them whatever they need to resolve this problem. They weren't pointing the finger at us. They were pointing the finger back at council and saying, give them what they need. And so that's where my position was created. There was a task force created by the council, consisting of council and town members. And they pretty much wrote me a blank check and said, you guys are so far behind the technology curve because we haven't had crime. We want you to be the leaders in the state, if not in the nation. And very wealthy municipality wrote me a blank check and said, you go investigate whatever the cutting edge technology is that you don't have, and you implement it as soon as possible. And that's what happened. In retrospect, the burglary rates resolved themselves pretty quickly because we had such a low crime rate. I think there was only 3 or 4 additional residential burglaries over that quarter that caused that spike. But in their perception, this was a huge problem. And so that's kind of where you came in. You came in, I think, about halfway through our implementation on all this technology. And we did. We got it implemented, and we were bleeding edge. People from all over the country were coming out to see what we were doing. And that's when your firm came in and we met.
Yeah, and I was one of your first test victims. I don't know if you remember this, but I wasn't speeding, but I was on. I had a nice
What they
rental
all
car.
say.
I was I was busted by your newly installed cactus cams.
Oh, yes, I remember
So
those.
I get back home to. I was living in Baltimore at the time. I get back home and there's a ticket waiting for me. Um,
And,
I called you guys and I said, "Hey, it works. Now can you get rid of this?" And you didn't. So I'm gonna
and
hold that against you. Um, but no, going back to sustainable, that's a cool story, right? Because it was sort of public generated. Now that's an anomaly, right? Smaller town, affluent town, they can write you a blank check. So let's talk about that. If council says, "Tell me what you need, Commander," how did you come up with a number without knowing, uh, exactly what you're going to implement and what time frame, and is it going to work?
yeah, that required a lot of groundwork. And it wasn't, we didn't just go to them and say, okay, here's what we need. We started looking at what the technologies were available. We started going out and doing site visits to determine which the appropriate vendors were. And then from there, we decided how that gets implemented in our municipality, what it looks like, and what the long-term costs are going to be. So it was a lot of planning to get to that stage.
Yeah.
It's
And
different if your council says, here's $2 million, see what you can do with it,
yeah.
versus we want you to go out and get everything and then tell us what it's going to cost.
Mhm. And again, another factor in sustainable technology is being able to pivot, right? I'm sure you had to go back a couple of years in and say, look, the estimates were wrong, either way, up or down. And that communication piece with council, with your command staff, with chief, budget officers, what have you, is a key component in keeping things sustainable. Because if you shy away from those discussions and get locked into 5 years ago pricing and funding that doesn't work anymore, you're not going to be sustainable.
Sure. And I mean, that happened to us. Of course, it happens to everybody. We had
Yeah.
we had a big ticket item on a LPR vendor that told us an all-in cost, and we took it to council. And then after we got a funding approval for it, came back and said, oh, well, that doesn't include installation. When we said all in, it wasn't really all in. And we had to go back and say, I need another almost $1 million for installation on this. And that's
Yeah.
hard to do. And that's part of hiring a firm like Avèro, where we have the experience in these things, that we can help you avoid some of those pitfalls. Because I don't want to say I'm the smartest guy in the room. I've made a lot of mistakes and I've learned from them. And if I can help other people avoid them, that's one of the reasons I'm here.
Yeah, and we've done that, right? We can't name names, but we recently saved what, $1.5 million investment in an RMS from a large city,
Absolutely.
that would have been in the same position if not for your
Right.
due
And
diligence.
that's horrible. I know of an agency that's been through three CAD implementations in 5 years, and the third one's not working either. And you look at the cost, not just the cost that you have to go back to council with, but your employees' time and morale, spending 5 years of constant implementations that never work. And it's just
Yeah.
defeating.
Yeah. How did you do it? Meaning, I mean, it was, yeah, you got funding. You convinced council, rather council convinced you to do this. And then you guys did a lot of things like cactus cam, for example. It was novel. It was interesting, right? We've seen um, cellular antennas put into palm trees, but fake cactuses was something
That's
really
one
good.
that
You guys made it into in some newspaper or national publication for doing that.
Well, not intentionally. It goes back to communication. You need to be upfront about the stuff, especially stuff where you think your public might have some concerns.
Hmm.
Whether it's you're using AI now for facial recognition or you're recording license plates, they have a lot of concerns. So having
Yeah.
a clear policy on how it will be used, how it won't be used, how long the data will be retained, and being upfront about it. So that the Cactus Cam is an interesting story. We were installing license plate readers everywhere we had infrastructure. So where we had traffic lights and traffic poles, we put them on the traffic lights and traffic poles. But you have to understand this is a very wealthy municipality that spends a lot of money on streets, landscaping, beautification. And we had a couple of roundabouts that had just gone in that they spent a lot of money on, and
Hmm.
we needed LPRs there. And our public works director just shook his head and said, "I can't put a pole with a camera in the middle of this. I just spent 1.2 million on beautifying this roundabout. I
Yeah.
can't put a bare metal camera hanging." And so we got the idea. We had a hidden cell sites all throughout town, small cells in fake cactuses. Obviously, cactuses are very popular. They're all over our city in Arizona. And so they came up with the idea of let's just use the same vendor to create a faux cactus. Instead of putting a cell site in there, we'll put a license plate
Good.
reader in the areas where we don't have infrastructure to hang it on. And so I think we had 3 of those out of 17 installations. And they looked great. You drove by and it looked like a cactus unless you looked and you noticed, well, there's a hole at the top of it with a camera behind it. But we had a
Yeah, I'm
town
trying to
manager that very
share the screen here with the cactus cam. I can't get.
you've got a picture of it. So
I've got it, but it's not showing. Anyway, I
we had
got
a
it.
town
There you go.
there. That's what it looked like. So we had a
Yeah.
town manager that was very nervous about messaging, and I went to him and I said, "Look, we need to get out in front of this and tell the public this is what we're doing. It's only in 3 installations where there's no infrastructure to put it on. The rest of them are out where everybody can see it. We put maps on our website. Here's where they're at. We didn't hide it at all. We publicized it. But I said, we need to tell people we're going to put them in these cameras and tell them why and tell them all the installations that don't have cactuses that are just out visible." And he got worried. He spent a week trying to figure out the messaging. And before he got a message out, somebody noticed it. Somebody called the paper, and it was all over the media that we're hiding cameras in cactus now, which was not really the case, but I can certainly see the public opinion. And that, again, goes back to you need to be out in front with your public on what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, and so what, at the end of the day, Mike. So here's another. It's called. Did you call it cacti? No, was that the new fox? Cacti.
And
Um,
those things were very expensive. I think we spent
okay.
like $200,000 on each cactus implementation. So it wasn't like we were doing anything to try and save money, or it was very expensive for us to do this. And it was just about the aesthetic look of the landscape in the area.
That was interesting. It got me, like I said. Um, so what else did you all do? So I remember you doing LPRs. Um, you did an RMS overhaul, didn't you?
We did.
RMS, yeah,
We did an
JBL.
RMS, a record management system. We did a computer aided dispatch system, new AFIS, automated fingerprint system, a new mugshot capture system,
That
cameras
was
in the
cool. I,
cars.
I remember your handhelds.
Oh yeah,
The Those were super high end. You could do fingerprints, iris
in the
scans,
field.
blood
Yeah.
samples,
Yep.
all of that in
So
one
we
device.
Cameras in the cars, body worn cameras, computers in the cars, which we'd never had before, which of course requires gateways in the cars. The
Hmm.
license plate reader system. We had a ring around the town with license plate readers that would read any cars coming into town. Um, we subscribe to Accurate, just crime analytics
Hmm.
packages, just so much stuff. It's mind numbing almost how much stuff we put in a short period of time.
And I also remember drones were kind of they were there at the time, but you didn't quite go that far. What seemed to
No,
be at the time going too far.
no, and actually, my agency is doing some pretty innovative stuff with drones now. But no, at the
Okay.
time, the technology wasn't really there, and we were doing so much that we felt like we just needed to stick to. There were so many basics that we needed that it was
Hmm.
enough to worry about that at the time.
So looking ahead, right, you finished that project, successful, crime goes down, and I think, and then the council said, now what? Do
Yeah.
we have more data? Can you give us analytics? Can you? So that it turned into more of a intelligence project after that, didn't it?
Right. Well, and again, I go back to communication. You said crime went down, and in reality, we did drive crime down, but crime numbers went up because you got to realize we were catching so many more people now than we were before that it. And we communicated this to our council. Hey, don't be surprised if our crime numbers start to go up because we've got license plate readers all over town. We got license plate readers on cars. We've got all this cool technology we're utilizing. We're going to catch more people. It's not that they weren't there that crime is going up. They were there. We just weren't catching them. Now we're catching them, and we're driving crime down. So
Hmm.
that's absolutely the case. Yeah. So I mean, once all the stuff is in, we hear from a lot of employees and a lot of agencies that are worried. Well, if I do all this stuff, I'm gonna have to lay staff off because we're going to be so much more efficient. And that I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
Um, we become way more efficient. We just do our jobs in different ways. And you're right, the data analytics behind it creates new and unique jobs and opportunities for people. And we can visualize what we're doing, why we're doing it in a much more efficient way and thorough way for a
Hmm.
council. And, just one example, you implement a body worn camera program and people don't realize how much time redaction takes and how much staff. Depending on your public records laws, you have to release everything. We had to release pretty much everything, which means we had to redact. We've got two cameras on every car. We've got a camera on every cop. We go out to a scene and there's 4 or 5 officers. You may have 10 or 15 different video feeds of 2 or 3 hours that somebody's got to watch and redact. And there's been a lot of agencies that don't think that far ahead and implement buy a body worn camera program and then shutter it because they don't have staff to redact and
Yeah.
legally they can't comply.
Well, not just that, storage, right? How do you? There's I know there's cloud solutions, but that therein lies the devil's in the detail, right? How much is
Right.
that going to cost you? It depends on how much you're going to produce. And now it comes down to setting policies on when do you leave it open? Do you auto, uh, record when certain things happen? Is it tied to your RMS and CAD? So when you enter a certain area, it turns on. So the tech can do it all, but you need to come
Yes.
up with those policies that tell the tech that this is what I want you to do or the agency wants you to do. And that has a direct impact on budgets. So talk to me about how you handled it and how you think agencies, because, and we'll go back to data analytics. I missed that point because we're also working on a pretty cool project together on marrying public safety data into zoning violations and things. And so it becomes important not just from a PD standpoint, but also citywide management. Um, but back to my other point here. Siri. My other point on sustainability, right? What are your thoughts on that?
You need to plan for it ahead of time.
Mhm.
You're right. The data storage cost can get out of control very quickly. So having it, and I preach this all the time. Anytime you're implementing a new technology, you need to look at use cases, how your department wants to use it,
Mhm.
and you need to have a strong policy and procedure in place on it, letting your staff and the public know this is how it will be used, this is how it will not be used, this is what we're doing with the data. And you can adjust that. I mean, if your data is getting out of control, you can adjust when you're requiring it to come on and off. But, I'd be remiss if I didn't say on the other end of that policy and procedure is you've got to have a good plan in place to audit this technology. Number one, to make sure that the vendor is performing as anticipated, that it's actually doing what they told you it will do correctly. But number two is staff, because we're all creatures of habit, and if there's a way to do it easier than the right way, a lot of our staff will fall into that. And so having supervisors who have a specific audit policy on it that will go out and make sure it's being used the way that we intended for it to be used, and we're getting the right return on the investment.
Yeah.
But you're right that the storage costs are crazy, and I think a lot of that goes with doing your due diligence. So if you're going to go with a particular software package, call it body-worn cameras, go talk to an agency that, and if this is your first implementation, you probably don't have any idea of what storage costs are going to be like. Go talk to agencies that have implemented it and say, what size are you growing per year on your storage per officer, so we can scale that to ours? And what are your policies on it? When are you required to turn it on? When are you required to turn it off? And then we can get a general idea. Now we multiply that on a 5-year contract to realize what our storage is going to look like. And it gives you a better idea for what your long-term funding is going to be. And on the backside of that is, knowing when you can purge that data, setting those records, so that there's a way to automatically purge data. Maybe it's when the case is adjudicated and the prosecutor says you can. Maybe it's just something simple that if it's not classified as a crime, we keep it for 6 months and it deletes off the server. But there's a way to long-term hold that if it becomes a homicide case that we're going to have to keep forever.
Yeah. Is there ever a case, Mike, for on-site, on-premise storage? Or are you going to run out at a pretty quick rate that you can't? That's not practical.
I hate to say never. If it's a small agency with a small deployment, I suppose you could make a case for on-site, but really everything is going cloud-based. It's really cheaper in the long run to do it that way. You've got the expansion that you need. You don't have to worry about backups. I've seen agencies storing stuff on non-backed up servers, or even on standalone hard drives that's evidentiary in nature. And if those things fail, it's really hard to step to the mic and explain why you lost a major case because you stored a critical piece of evidence on a hard drive that failed, that wasn't backed up. You just don't have those concerns when you go to the cloud.
Yeah. So going back to sustainability, I know you're not at that agency anymore, but I know you've got, connections and you keep in touch. What happened? Because it's been 10 years since you implemented those technologies with all of that money. A blank check was it sustainable? Have they kept up? What did they have to do as they came to sort of end of life on some of the tech? Some things got obsolete within 10 years. How did they stay sustainable, and what kind of measures had you built in as you implemented these technologies?
Sure, that's a great question. We realized pretty quickly that this technology was going to get overwhelming for us if we didn't get a handle on it. And so my primary function was I was responsible for everything technology related in the department. Mm-hmm. And so I created a stakeholder group of system admins for each piece of the technology. So those people owned that technology, they understood it, and we had standing meetings weekly where I was the authority maker. I had the authority to make any decisions we needed to deal with vendors. You got to have somebody who has that kind of authority to get things done. And then we would just meet and we would talk about what problems are we having with the software? What do we need to do to get it fixed? Do I need to go yell at the vendor? Do we need to implement some new patch? What do we need to do? We would run through those issues. We would talk about required system changes. So a lot of times we would get officers or staff, civilian staff, that would say, we want to make this change to the system. It would be really cool. The problem is a lot of times you don't realize how making a change in one system affects what's happening in the others where they integrate. And so we would talk about it before anybody made any system admin changes. We would talk about it and say, this is what's being requested. I think it's a good idea. How does it affect everybody else's software? Is it going to be a problem? So we didn't end up with those unanticipated consequences. We would evaluate new technologies. We would find out about them. We stayed very involved. I went to IACP every year. I went to the vendor exhibit hall and looked at all the new technologies. I and some of my staff went to IACP's Law Enforcement Information Technology group. So we were members, and we went to that annual conference, and we looked at the vendor hall at the Information Technology Conference. We joined user groups. We attended conferences. We started relationships with people that had agencies that had similar technologies around us to talk about what issues are you having, where are you heading, what's next for you. And so we would look at those things, and we would stay very current. We would talk about what do we need to plan for that's the next big thing that's coming up. What kind of groundwork do we need to do so that we're ready for that? And we would talk about those things every week to make sure that we were ready. We were dealing with the problems we had. We were aware of what's coming out, and we were preparing the groundwork for the next thing. And that, I think, is crucial. I see a lot of agencies that are in the same boat. That they say, we had this technology, we implemented it. It's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 15 years later. We've never actually upgraded it or done anything. It doesn't really do what we need it to do, and we don't know what to do with it. But nobody's really taken responsibility for that overall technology umbrella of the agency. And I just tell them, we can help you, we can get you current. But if you don't do something like that so that you're paying attention to it on a weekly basis, you're going to end up in the same position in 3 or 5 years. And you've sunk millions of dollars from your counsel into it, and you're in the same boat. So somebody really, and it's hard for us as cops because a lot of us are not really technology savvy. So having a great relationship with your IT department is another crucial. And we see a lot of times that IT and PD are really not communicating. It has to be a partnership in that 100%.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You said you were, the leader of tech for your PD. How did you foster that relationship with central IT or the overall IT director? Because you're right, it's important. We see this everywhere, almost everywhere we go, right? There's a little bit of a rub on PD being part of the city. They're part of the environment and the infrastructure that the overall city has. And then PD wants to move faster with certain things because they've got certain grants or leadership that wants to move faster. City IT doesn't, for good reason, right? Security, overall funding, and to your point, PD's chiefs or commanders don't necessarily understand why they can't have this new and shiny thing right now. And IT is trying to tell them, well, we don't have the infrastructure for it. We don't have the whatever bandwidth, server, what have you. A good understanding of how technology works from a nuts and bolts IT perspective is really important. So how did you navigate all of this?
Sure. Well, initially, when we got this funding, we were given an IT position at PD that reported to me. And that was, the holy grail. Things worked great during that period of time. And then councils come and go, new council members come on that were involved in that project. New IT directors come on to go, well, why is an IT guy reporting to the police commander? He belongs to me. New mayor comes in, and I lost that position. I fought for it as hard as I could, and it really negatively impacted what we were able to do and the sustainability. So you've heard me say many, many times, I'm all about building relationships. So it was getting to know the IT director, getting to know the IT staff, getting them to commit to having one IT person in the police department's IT meetings every week who understood what was happening at the police department and could navigate for us some of those things about, you want to install new mobile fingerprint readers, but we need to have a secure connection to the state to transmit that data, and we don't have the right router or the right network configuration, and we need to buy this piece of hardware, and it's expensive and it's the next budget cycle. So having somebody that can talk to us through those things so that we can understand what the infrastructure issues really are, what we need to do to make that happen. But it's also a good place for us to advocate and say, man, this is really a critical piece of technology, and I know you've got it planned out for 2 years. We need to move it up. And here's why. Here's why it's so critical for us. So it's that two-way give and take conversation and relationship between us. And then it's really good communication with whoever is going to champion these projects for you at the council level. So, face it, there's just times where you're going to run into a roadblock, and IT is going to say, "Look, we can't get to that. We've got other things that are too important." Your project's going to stall. And if it's really an important project and you think it's valuable to move it ahead of whatever else IT is saying is the priority, getting your chief or someone who can go to the IT director, plead your case, and then go to the council if that doesn't work and say, here's what I need, here's why it's not happening, can you help me get some movement on this?
Like with
That's
everything else.
always
Yeah.
that's always a last resort because, again, I'm all about the relationships and I don't want to burn them. But if it's a do or die, you got to have somebody that's willing to champion the project for you.
Well, and it comes down to getting someone else to understand how the pieces fit, right? And in our work, that's what we've seen where we come in most often is just translation. You're saying the same exact thing, and you're on the same page, but you're in a fight because you're using different words that the other
Right.
person doesn't understand. Um, and a lot of this is conflict resolution and just communication and making sure that everyone understands the other person. Um, no, but that's great. I know you have other things to talk about, but what have we not covered, Mike?
Um, I think one of the important things to talk about is ongoing maintenance contracts. I've seen this before, and I can give you an example. They tend to creep. They're usually pretty good when you initially sign with a technology vendor. You know what you're getting, you know what the expectations are. And then, 3 or 5 years later, you renew and they send you a new contract. And a lot of times those things don't get read real well. And the vendor will start changing terms in there that you didn't realize. And I'll give you an example. When I was at my agency, we implemented, like we said, this license plate reader system. It was all over the main thoroughfares into town. It was on the cars. It worked really well. It was a major vendor that everybody does business with. And they had a local presence. And their maintenance contract said that if anything went wrong, they sent a local technician out, and they got up in a bucket truck and they pulled the hardware off of the traffic poles, and they fixed it, they replaced it, they came back out and reinstalled it, they made sure it was working right. It was really set it and forget it for us. If there was a problem, the vendor took care of it. And I was just having lunch with some of my old staff recently, and they were expressing frustration over the license plate reader system. And I said, well, why don't you just call the vendor? And they said, yeah, the vendor's changed the contract terms. We didn't realize it. The vendor started losing business in the area. They don't have as much of a local presence anymore. So they don't have technicians anymore on standby to come out and do that. And one of my old staff was telling me, I got a license plate reader that doesn't work, and I call them for maintenance, and they say, yeah, we can't do anything. We need the serial number to actually ping it to see what's going on. And he says, well, ping it. He says, well, when we installed it, we didn't write down the serial numbers on where we installed them. So you need to go out there and get in a bucket truck and open it up and get the serial number and then call us back and we'll ping it. And then if it doesn't work, you need to get in a bucket truck and you need to uninstall it, send it back to us, and then we'll get it fixed the way we can. We'll send it back, and then you get back up in the bucket truck, reinstall it. And oh, by the way, could you record the serial number of the new unit, because we don't do that. And I just shook my head and said, this is crazy. Why doesn't somebody call them and say, we're not paying EMA again until somebody gets out here and fixes this problem?
Mm-hmm.
But that's that creep. They didn't realize that the terms changed because they're not reading through the entire maintenance contract. They just assume, oh, it's just the same standard contract we get every year. And if you sign those things and send them off, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's even more critical within the SaaS world, right? It because the threat of the vendor pulling the plug on your system is always present if you don't pay or don't make the monthly payment or what have you. But at the same time, if they're not delivering on their promise of service like you described, is there recourse? We did a live last week with a lawyer that specializes in dealing with software vendors and contract breaches and negotiations. So that's a cool one to go watch. Um, I think I'm out of topics or questions for now, Mike. but I know
All right.
that's not forever. So I think we'll reconvene on another topic at some other time. Unless you have other things to bring up. I know you're one that prepares pretty heavily for anything you do.
I do. We've just scratched the surface of things that we should be considering to maintain these implementations over the long term. We didn't talk about doing due diligence on vendors.
Yeah.
When you write writing an RFP scope is a whole nother topic. But
Hmm.
when you get vendors that are submitting, you need to do your due diligence. You need to be going and doing site visits. I cannot stress enough. We get clients that we talk to that say, I'm just going to buy off a cooperative contract. If it's good enough for XYZ agency, it's good enough for me. And a lot of times that's not true. We need to make sure that the vendor has done a project of your scope for agency of your size. We want to go out and talk to these people. Just because they've got a cooperative contract doesn't mean that they made a successful implementation. Um, they may have finally got it implemented, but there might have been a lot of pain. And you talk to that agency, and they might say, "I wouldn't do it with this vendor again."
Yeah.
Or we have agencies that have cooperative contracts that got it implemented, but halfway into the contract, it fails. The software vendor can't maintain it, the system crashes, and we want to keep people away from those things. Whenever possible, reach out and do reference checks. If possible, and I know it's hard with staffing levels these days, go out and do site visits with agencies that have had it. And I tell them, don't just send one person. When we would go out and do site visits, my crime analyst would go and sit with their crime analyst, and my dispatch supervisor would go sit with their dispatch super. And we would put people next to people in those positions because I'm not going to know the right questions to ask the CAD supervisor. I might know some, but I'm not going to get into the details. My CAD supervisor, she's going to ask all the right details, and she's going to come out of that saying, "Yeah, this is the right system for us," or "This is not going to work for us." So I would take multiple people to these site visits, and I get agencies that kind of go, and I said, "Look, you're talking about spending millions of dollars and years of your agency's time in a vendor relationship. Spend a couple of days and a couple of $1,000 to send people out there to make sure that it's the right relationship you want to be in."
That's a great point. And we're doing that for several clients. You and I are meeting tomorrow at a site visit. So looking forward to that. And the context of that is we're helping another uh, pretty large PD select a new RMS and set up a real-time information center, crime information center. So we're going to see one that is already in place so we can inform our recommendations and design for our client here. So, Mike, thanks for joining me today. I will see you tomorrow, but uh, again, it's always a pleasure, and it's always something, when I talk to you, learn something new every day. So appreciate
Thank you.
your
We appreciate
time.
it.
Yeah. All right.